Well, thank you very much, Teresa. It's, we're getting to that funny point. We're putting February behind us. March comes in. Of course, that means a lot of things on the energy front, but also means a lot of stuff on the political front, which the two may be very much connected. As I mentioned 5, 6, 7 years ago with AffordableEnergy.ca, when you start messing around with affordability on energy prices, you start to wind up with general universal unaffordability for the country. Now, the number one issue in Canada, regardless of who the pollster is. But I digress. This is an interesting week because of what's happening south of the border. Continuation of the likelihood of the tariffs being imposed on Tuesday, the 4th of March. The Canadian dollar showing some weakness. That means that the price could actually go up if prices remain stable in U.S. markets for commodities like gasoline, diesel, and for oil. And so what we've seen this week, though, has been a very calming decrease in gas prices pretty much everywhere from coast to coast. BC fell about 4 cents a liter net. Ontario fell about 4 cents down to the 151 range from 156. Quebec, the same thing. And of course, in some places in Atlantic Canada, they finally caught up to what we've been doing in the rest of the country. And in places like Nova Scotia, you saw gasoline prices drop 6 cents a liter today, 3 cents in Newfoundland, New Brunswick, and of course in PEI. But it does suggest that the markets are somewhat nervous again about what's happening. We're in a very different period of time where OPEC has to make a decision as to whether or not it's going to start putting back more oil in the markets. At the same time, the Trump administration has finally restored the sanctions on Venezuela. Now, Venezuela was the hope for many companies in the U.S. that they'd be able to get heavy oil, which they desperately need to make diesel. So that's because U.S. gasoline is produced with U.S. oil, but it cannot make diesel. Light, tight shale oil produced in the United States, the drill baby drill stuff that you heard about, it's great for gasoline, but you can't produce the stuff you need to run your economy, a modern economy, a transport-intensive economy. You can't do your mining, you can't do your agriculture, you can't do your aviation or your transportation matrix, whether it be by plane, train, or automobile, without diesel. And by automobile, of course, I mean light-duty trucks, etc. So what that's really means is that Canada finds itself in a very unique position in that, yes, there may be sanctions coming, but there may be tariffs coming, but it does mean that Canadian oil is highly prized and valuable. Just a side note on this, Teresa, is that, one of the alternatives for the United States to get heavy oil has always been Mexico, if not Venezuela or Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is not interested in selling much to the United States. It has its own markets in Asia, and they're doing very well, thank you. As I mentioned, Venezuela is a basket case. It continues to be sanctioned, and Chevron, which had a deal to get 250,000 barrels, is now finding that they won't be able to do that anymore under the Trump administration, who said no finally. And Mexican oil. Yes, well, there's a lot of oil that was coming from Mexico in the United States in exchange for natural gas. The problem is that the heavy oil that Mexico has is contaminated. A lot of water, a lot of salt in it. So it's not good stuff. It's why we've heard President Trump on the same day he says, I want to reimpose tariffs or impose tariffs on Canada, saying, hey, we should build the Keystone XL pipeline. Let's get onto it. He knows, as do American producers, that without Canadian oil, your economy will come to a halt. And by the way, the numbers prove it. The United States produces 13 million barrels a day. That's up from 5 million barrels 15 years ago. But they consume 21 million barrels a day. So anyway you slice it, they're short. They'd just like to get a lot more Canadian oil. It'd be great if we went from 4 million to 8 million barrels a day if we had the pipeline capacity, not just the United States, but to around the world. You can imagine what that would do in terms of revenues to the federal provincial government. It would double those revenues and, of course, leave the Americans in a situation where they would have no alternative but to go for Canadian energy. And, of course, I also have to be mindful of what happened last week, Teresa. We saw the United States and Japan come to a conclusion idea based on LNG. $1 trillion. Now, why do I say it slowly? Because Canada had 17, 18 LNG projects with all the natural gas we have, could have been supplying the Japans of this world, the Germanys, the South Koreas, you name it. But we decided that there was no business case. And that we blocked pipelines by a group of lost climate fanatics who basically hogtied Canada's resources. In the meantime, the United States now has a $1 trillion potential bonanza deal. And by the way, here's the kicker. They buy it from us for $3 an MMBtu. That's the variation, and they sell it to Japan, to Europe, or wherever for $15 to $18. So, in other words, Canada, yeah, you can supply the raw material, but don't worry about the higher value added. We'll look after the United States because your government, your Liberals, your New Democrats, your Bloc, and your Greens have blocked Canadian energy because we believe that a molecule called CO2 is somehow going to bring the world to an end, especially if it's being produced in Canada. By the way, it's plant food. It's not a pollutant. And any politician that tells you that is fundamentally dishonest. Anybody who calls themselves a scientist making that claim should never be called a scientist. They should be called false scientists. These are not people who understand the science, the breakdown of molecules, and its importance in terms of society. I digress. On the question of energy, Canada has a big role to play, an even bigger role to play if government that came into power were to prepare itself to allow our energy products to get to all markets in the world, not just the United States. And I think that's where we're going. You want to do something to help Canadians right now, Teresa? The biggest thing we could do, get more Canadian oil and gas sold to the rest of the world. Canadian dollar would strengthen, and you and I would be saving 26 cents a liter. Get rid of the carbon tax. That's only one thing. Another savings of 20 cents a liter. Get rid of the second carbon tax. You'd save another 4 or 5 cents a liter in British Columbia, another 20 cents a liter. Imagine a situation where diesel, gasoline, all of our input costs to move goods in this country were to drop by 50 or 60 cents a liter. That's exactly the difference between what we're seeing in terms of where Canada ought to be going and what the Liberals under Mark Carney or whoever, the NDP and the Greens want to continue to impose on Canadians. And then they wonder why there's an affordability crisis. It all comes back to energy. And when you start fooling around with policies that no other country would dare, those that have done so, Germany and Britain, are in absolute economic decline. Energy costs have gone way too high for most people. Manufacturing is leaving, and with it, economic activity. So it's pretty clear to me that when you have a policy in this country that has been proven to be ultimately wrong, not just as it's imposed on Canadians, but as it's been unfolding in places like Germany, in places like Britain. And the reason why, of course, the United States has rejected this is very simple. They're not prepared to impose and punish their consumers in the way Canadians have allowed their government to do so. A government, by the way, which lacks complete legitimacy. So I'd say, in the next week or so, let's watch for energy prices to stabilize next week and start to move back up as we head towards April 1st. I know it's not that far away, a month away. We're going to have carbon tax, another one you voted for, 4 cents a liter. An increase in the price of 6 cents a liter for the shift over from winter to summer gasoline on April 15th. And the rest is history. Great time for an election. We'll talk to you soon, Teresa.